If you are looking to do research on the road to UFC shows this weekend, there is only one place where you'll find the largest collection of links to past fights for all 20 of the competitors. And don't worry, we have the alternates ready to go to post just in case any of these fighters fall out. We'll have them up for you guys within this a snap of a finger. But if you're looking to find resources and links to past fights for all these fighters, we have them all on the MMA Fight Archive. There are only 2 spots left in the Pioneer tier, which will save you 25% off the lifetime of your membership if you sign up. Again, hop on those last 2 spots if you want to. Otherwise, it's only $9.99 a month. Very cheap, especially if you take your predicting, breaking down, and analyzing the fights seriously. The MMA Fight Archive is your one-stop shop. We're over at 1,200. We're closing in on 1,300 fighter profiles on there right now. But the most important ones are going to be the road to UFC ones going down this weekend. Make sure you guys check it out. MMA Fight Archive, link in the description below, as well as the top comment. Again, only 2 spots left to save some money on the lifetime of your membership. Check it out. Welcome to another episode of the MMA Lockcast. I'm your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, and your boy on social media at MMALOTN. This week, we're going over the first episode of day 1 of Road to UFC. For those of you unfamiliar with the Road to UFC, it is a tournament-style show that the UFC does with upcoming talent, mainly from the Asian, or at least that part of the world, that scene. They're trying to pluck some prospects out of there, put them into a tournament, have 3 shows sprinkled out throughout the year, and figure out which fighter they can bring to the main show, bring them to the UFC, and sign them to a contract. It was very fun last year. They're bringing it back this year as well, and it's a solid format and a good way for people to get familiar with some of these fighters before they eventually make their UFC debuts. And I'm breaking down episode 1. So there are 4 episodes, 5 fights on each episode. If you want access to the rest of the breakdowns, they're going to be strictly on the Patreon. Link in the description below for the remaining 15 fights, all which will be broken down in written form for you guys. So make sure you guys check that thing out. But a quick reminder, I plugged it at the beginning of the show, MMA Fight Archive. If you're looking for tape on these fighters, I got you covered. Pretty much every single fighter has footage, more than enough footage for you to make an educated prediction, analysis, breakdown, and potentially even a bet if you would like on any one of those guys. So make sure you guys go check that out. Not to mention also A1 Combat 11 goes down this weekend. Fighter profiles for those guys are pretty much all up at this point in time. I believe I only have a few left to go, but they will be up over the next 24 hours or so. So make sure you guys check that out if you want to get some action down on the Uriah Faber's A1 Combat promotion as well. We have all the resources you need to study up on those guys. All right, let's not waste any more time. We got 5 fights to get through for this card. I believe it is for the, yes. So there are, sorry, I got a little bit off track here. We have a couple different weight classes. Actually, it's the featherweights and the flyweights that are on showcase in episode 1, as well as the first fight of the night, which is a showcase bout in the flyweight division between Top Noai Kiwram going up against Nyam Jargal Tumendemberel. I'm going to be butchering some of these names, so bear with me. There's one that I got down that I feel like I'll be very proud of when we get to it, but this Nyam Jargal Tumendemberel is not one that I've gotten down yet. Top Noai was on the last season of the Road to UFC, actually in the flyweight tournament, and pulled off a very big upset in his first fight where he defeated LFA prospect Yuma Horiyuchi, where he was able to keep the fight upright and utilize his patented Muay Thai skills to beat him to the punch. He is a product of formerly the Tiger Muay Thai camp, but followed the Hickman brothers over to Bang Tao Muay Thai and now mainly trains with those guys. As you can tell, he has very solid and fluid Muay Thai striking, throwing in combinations, usually ending with leg kicks as well. And this guy is a fighter. He loves goading on his opponents. Even in fights he ends up going to lose, lose. If you remember in the semifinal bout against the Korean fighter whose name is escaping me at the moment in time, that fighter actually went on to win the tournament. But he dropped that fighter and really started goading him on and screaming Muay Thai, like just trying to flex his guns pretty much. And then he ended up getting choked out shortly thereafter. So a little bit of fight IQ issues at times with the guy, but he's a very solid striker, good power in his hands, and he's improving his defensive grappling game as well. So that's something to keep an eye on. His opponent this weekend is a Mongolian fighter who started his career in late 2020 and has put together a 6-0 record thus far. It's hard to tell how good he actually is considering the level of competition on the Mongolian regional scene is very low level. He seems like a fighter though. Like he throws solid strikes. He has some decent ground game as well. He has some submissions on his record. But he seems a little bit raw at times. Like, we know Mongolians are fighters, right? The whole Genghis Khan thing. We know these guys like to go out there and scrap, but the technical aspects of their game are still very much behind what we see from normal, regional MMA on the, North American side of things. He's vicious. He's aggressive. He loves to go for the finish. So I am leaning with Top Nawai as my pick in this matchup. The line is roughly around -130. It was a lot wider earlier this week, and we got a lot of reaction on the Mongolian fighter to bring that line down. But I didn't bet on the road to UFC last season, but this season I'm unsure how many props they're going to be releasing for these shows. But one that I would be kind of targeting is the fight doesn't go to decision. I think Top Nawai is the far better technical striker in this matchup, and that likely will allow him to find that knockout blow here over the raw and still green Mongolian fighter. If this fight does get taken to the ground, maybe Nyarjagal's jiu-jitsu is slightly better than Top Nawai. It's possible, but I think for the most part, Top Nawai has more legitimate experience under his belt, has fought the tougher competition, and I think that's going to translate for him in this matchup to end up getting a knockout victory. Hopefully that's enough for him in this showcase bout to get another shot in the UFC, or at least a shot to fight in the UFC, but we'll see how that ends up going down. I'm going to go with Top Nawai for the knockout. Next up, we got a very exciting Japanese prospect, Tsuruya, going up against an Indonesian fighter, Ronald Siahaan. Tsuruya training under a fighter that's actually in the main event on this episode, Sasu. Both fighters fighting the same way. They have grapple-heavy approaches where they look to take their opponents to the ground and do solid damage from on top. And he's been able to finish, I believe, he's finished all 6 of his opponents with a relentless grappling approach. He takes these guys to the ground, looks for ground and pound, or looks for submission opportunities. His striking still needs a little bit of work, but I love what I see from him in terms of his in-and-out karate stance that he brings. He blitzes in and out of range, but he doesn't use his hands often. He's just using his footwork where he stays mobile enough and then brings his feet with him close enough to range where he can change levels and get in on the hips of his opponent, take them to the ground, and then get to work with his superior top game. His cardio looks on point, which is very important for somebody that tries to implement this type of grappling pressure, pace, and style, and it seems to be working for him thus far, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing if he can take this thing to the top. His opponent, like I said, is an Indonesian fighter with a 7-0 flawless record himself, and he's been able to finish all but 2 of his opponents. Some of them, I believe most of them by knockout, but he's been able to pull off a couple of submissions as well. He looks to be a fighter that enjoys striking a little bit more, has some nice straight shots down the pipe. His scrambling game with his jiu-jitsu and his wrestling is not that bad, but another guy similar to the Mongolian fighter that I spoke about earlier, the Indonesian MMA scene is still not up to par with the regional scene in the rest of the world. So he's fighting guys that he likely is better than, but those guys are probably just tomato cans compared to the LFA scene or compared to, the PFL scene or something like that. He shows some good chops. He shows some good potential, but his takedown defense is a little bit of an issue, and that's all that people needed to see when the lines opened here to push Tsuruya all the way up to a -900 favorite. Makes complete sense to me. I think we see the Japanese fighter take him down, grind him out, and then eventually find a finish within the first 2 rounds. Another spot where I'd look to take the Japanese fighter to win inside the distance, and maybe even violence as well, but I'm leaning with Tsuruya to win via submission. In the next matchup, we have a familiar face here in Jia Yi or Ji Jia, depending on how you want to go go about it. Going up against, this is the one I thought I had down, but now that it's time to record, I don't know if I'm going to have it down. Wuziazibieke. Yeah, he's the other fighter here, hailing from China as well. Starting off with Jia Yi. He actually made it to the finals of the road to UFC last year and had a very close fight against a Korean fighter whose name is escaping my mind at this moment in time as well. Very close fight. He tried implementing his grapple-heavy approach the entire time, had a little bit of success, but for the most part, it was his opponent that was landing the more damaging blows, and I think that's what ultimately two of the judges saw in his favor, and they were able to give him the split decision victory. Jia Yi was also able to pull off I believe an upset victory where he pulled off a submission in the first round against Sasu, who fights in the main event of this card. And then he had a back and forth fight in his second fight, which he ended up winning by split decision. And then was then obviously lost in the finals of his fight. But he has a ton of experience, 22-4, has been facing some very good competition in this half of his career thus far. Very talented in terms of the grappling realm. I think he'll be able to beat most of the guys on the regional scene or even like the lower level UFC guys, given his style. Forward pressure, takedowns, good grappling, good scrambling, good cardio as well. He just needs to get his hands a little bit better, but he does a very good job in terms of putting forward an aggressive style to really put the pressure on his opponents so that he can overwhelm them with the grappling style afterwards. His opponent, Wuziazibieke, has 42 fights. He's 30-11-1, but apparently has a ton of unsanctioned fights as well, because a lot of the commentators in his fights were saying he has over 50 to 60 professional fights. But based on what Tapology and Sherdog show, he only has about 42, which is, it's weird for me to even say only. Like, that's a lot of fights for a guy that's only 32 or 33 years old. He also comes from a wrestling background as well, but he seems a lot more robotic than his opponent this weekend. His striking, very, very low level. I think Jia Yi has a solid advantage in that realm, even though he's not a good striker in his own right. But I think that Wuziazibieke has an advantage when he gets fights to the ground over most opponents. But you see the level of opponents that he's going up against on the regional scene. You're like, why is he fighting a guy that's 0-0 when this is his 32nd fight or something like that, right? Like, it's not a good look for him at all. And you see when he fights fighters that are more legitimate, he just ends up coming up short. He's unable to get them to the ground, and then he ends up taking a shit kicking in the striking realm and ends up coming up short in those matchups. So I'm expecting Jia Yi to have the advantage pretty much everywhere in this matchup. I expect him to get the takedown with relative ease here, and I think he'll be able to smash him from on top and eventually win this fight. I think he finishes him as well. Like, I think there's a pretty big skill disparity in this matchup, and I think Jia Yi just absolutely eats him up and finishes him within 2 rounds. Moving on to the next fight. This fight, I wish these guys weren't matched up right off the bat, because these guys could potentially meet in the finals based on how good they are. I'm talking about Mark Climaco going up against Jung-Hyun Lee. We'll start off on the Climaco side, who is a hot prospect from the LFA scene. Only has 1 loss on his record to Yuma Horiguchi, who was able to snipe him from distance about 90 seconds into the matchup and knock him out. But for the most part, this AKA product is going out there and grinding guys to the ground, doing good damage from on top, grinding out most of his opponents to decision victories, but making guys that usually use that type of approach look like amateurs. Like the Cody Davis fight. Cody Davis is a solid prospect in his own right, but he ended up taking his first loss to Mark Climaco, who was able to utilize the same pressure and wrestling that Cody uses and use it against him and be very successful with it. I believe Climaco has taken the undefeated record of a ton of fighters. I don't have the actual number here ahead of me, but he's a very solid prospect. He's a guy that could get signed to the UFC pretty much immediately. Very solid wrestling. Striking still needs a little bit of work, but he does a great job in terms of closing the distance, getting his opponents to the mat, and doing damage from on top. His opponent this weekend is a 20-year-old fighter with an 8-0 record. He's very exciting in terms of his striking, good hand speed, great combinations, and great footwork. His takedown defense looks pretty good. Like, he does a great job of pummeling his opponents on the feet so that he draws out desperation takedowns from them so that he can stuff them, pivot off, get back into distance, and then get back to work with his handiwork. I'm surprised that he's still only 20 years old, because the guy has a ton of a ton of potential. My question here is, has he faced somebody with the wrestling of Mark Climaco? Mark Climaco? I feel like that's wrong. It is Mark Climaco. But I feel like, if he can stuff a couple of the takedowns here, he's very live to go out there and knock out Climaco. He's the better striker, bar none. But the big question mark is he ready for the type of wrestling that's coming his way from Climaco? I don't know about that. So in terms of picking a winner, I'm going to go with Mark Climaco to actually grind this fight. It's always hard to deal with the guy that has the cardio pace and wrestling style that Climaco brings to the table. But I think the odds are way off here. Last time I checked, it was minus 650 for Climaco, but I think we got to give Lee a little bit more credit. We got to believe that he can be the better striker here, which he absolutely is, and he might be able to have some success with getting back to his feet and beating up Climaco in the striking realm where he likely has the advantage. So, and we've seen Climaco actually show some issues in that realm in the past. So my prediction is going to be Climaco, but I want nothing to do with his minus 650. I'll be a little bit more content with playing him around minus 180, maybe even up to minus 230, but I still have question marks in terms of if he can keep Lee down. Lee looks like he has great cardio as well, and that could play against Climaco here, especially having to deal with the guy that's continuously looking to work to get back to his feet. So I think the better bet is the Lee side here in that plus 400 range. I'm going to take a little bit of a sprinkle myself, but if you're putting a gun to my head, who's going to win? You give me 50-50 odds. I'm going to go with the wrestler here and Mark Climaco. Moving on to the main event of episode 1, we're going to be going with Sasu going up against Sang-Won Kim. Very interesting fight here. Like I spoke about Sasu earlier when I was speaking about his pupil, Ray Tsuruya. Again, I'm butchering these names. I apologize, guys. Bear with me. You can see the names at the top of this, if anything, so you know who I'm talking about. Sasu has a wrestle-heavy approach. His striking, wild, erratic. It's winging hooks. But when he gets his opponents to the ground, he does a great job in terms of controlling them from there. His cardio looks okay, but I believe as he continues to take steps up in competition, he's going to struggle in terms of holding these guys down and not getting knocked out later on in matchups. But given the level of competition he's been going up against recently, I think that it will be passable for him for the first couple fights in the road to UFC tournament. I think he's a good enough grappler to hold down Sang-Won Kim, who looks to be more of a striker, if anything. And I'm surprised that the UFC is giving Kim a shot here, considering he's coming off a loss in November, which was his last fight, where he got completely grinded out in the grappling round by his opponent, who actually fights on a future episode of Road to UFC, and got finished on the ground because he just gassed out. It was a weird proposition, considering that it was one of those promotions where the first round is a 10-minute round and his opponent was able to get the finish in the 9th minute of that first round. But I don't think a 1-minute rest in between would have saved Kim from getting grounded and pounded the way that he did that night. And I believe that he's going to face the same issues here with Sasu, who should be able to get this fight to the ground more often than not, grind him out from on top, maybe even find a finish of his own, or he ends up going on and just winning a decision victory. So give me the Japanese fighter here to defeat the South Korean fighter, and I think, like I said, I think he does it by decision. There you guys go. All 5 fights for episode 1 on day 1 of Road to UFC. There are 15 more fights, all which will be broken down in written form on the Patreon, link in the description below. Check that out if you want to see where my action is at, where my prediction is at, and where my analysis is at for these Road to UFC fights. No UFC this weekend. Like I said, there's Uriah Faber's A1 Combat as well. I'm not doing breakdowns for it, but if you want to do any breakdowns for it or try to predict those fights, I got all the resources you need on the MMA Fight Archive, link in the description below. Make sure you guys check that out. And I will be back next week to break down UFC Vegas 74, I believe it is, headlined by a flyweight matchup between Kai Kara-France and Amir Albazi. Can't wait to do that for you guys. Hopefully you guys have a great week. Enjoy the fights for Road to UFC. Very early card, I believe 6 a.m. Eastern start time for episode 1 on Friday and Saturday, or Saturday and Sunday. And then episode 2 or 4 will be going down 8 a.m. Eastern as well. So if you like some early morning fights, Road to UFC has got you covered. All right, I'm blabbering on too much. I love you guys. I appreciate you guys. Hit that subscribe if you haven't already. Hit that like as well as if you haven't already. And I'll see you guys next week. Peace.
Last thing.